When the knock came, it was so faint that at first, Thomas barely noticed it over the sound of the rain pounding against the windows. He was at the kitchen counter, pouring himself a late cup of coffee, while his 8-year-old daughter, Chloe, sat cross-legged at the table coloring in her sketchbook. The knock came again, this time softer, almost hesitant, like the person on the other side wasn't sure they even wanted to be heard. Thomas glanced toward the door. This was a quiet neighborhood in a small Washington town. Visitors after dark were rare, especially on a cold, stormy Tuesday night. He set his coffee down and walked to the front door, Chloe's curious eyes following him. When he opened it, his breath caught. Standing there was a young woman, no older than her early 20s, soaked from head to toe. Her long hair clung to her face, and her thin sweatshirt was plastered to her skin. She held a small, worn-out backpack against her chest like it was the only thing she had left in the world. Her lips trembled, not just from the cold, but from something deeper. I'm sorry, she stammered, her voice barely audible over the rain. I didn't mean to bother you. I was just wondering if you knew where the nearest shelter is. Thomas hesitated. He could feel the icy wind swirling into the warmth of his home, hear Chloe shifting in her chair behind him. He was a single father, careful about who came around. He had to be. But something in the woman's eyes stopped him from closing the door. There was a hollow desperation there, the kind that comes from not having anywhere left to turn. Before he could respond, Chloe's small voice piped up from behind him. Daddy, she's shivering. The woman glanced down at the little girl, offering a faint, polite smile, but she didn't step forward. Thomas looked back at Chloe. Sweetheart, go sit down. Can she stay with us? Chloe asked suddenly, her voice full of innocent urgency. Just for tonight? Thomas froze. The woman's eyes widened, and she quickly shook her head. No, I couldn't, please, I'm not asking for that. I just need to know where I can go. The shelters I tried earlier were full. Her words carried a quiet shame, like she was afraid even asking for directions was too much. Thomas rubbed the back of his neck. He wasn't the kind of man to take strangers in. Not because he didn't care, he did, but because life had taught him to be cautious. Since his divorce 2 years ago, protecting Chloe had been his top priority. But when he looked at this young woman standing in the rain, he saw something that went beyond her tattered clothes and tired posture. He saw someone who had been fighting far too long, alone. What's your name? He asked finally. She hesitated. Mara. Well, Mara, Thomas said slowly, there's a small shelter about 4 miles away. I can drive you there if you want. Her lips pressed together, like she was trying not to show her disappointment. That would be great. Thank you. Thomas nodded, reaching for his coat. Chloe, however, wasn't having it. Daddy, she whispered urgently, tugging on his sleeve. It's cold. What if the shelter's full too? She could get sick. Chloe. Please, Chloe begged. Just for tonight. I don't think she has anywhere else to go. Thomas looked from his daughter to Mara, who was standing silently, her shoulders slumped. Something in Chloe's plea stirred an ache in him, an ache he'd felt himself on nights when money was tight and loneliness crept in. With a sigh, he stepped back. Come in. Just for tonight. Mara's eyes widened again, but this time in disbelief. I don't want to impose. You won't, Thomas said firmly. But you need to get warm. She stepped inside slowly, like she was afraid the offer might be taken back. Chloe hurried off to grab a towel from the bathroom, while Thomas closed the door and hung his coat. The smell of rain and the faint scent of exhaustion followed Mara in. He handed her the towel Chloe brought. You can dry off. There's a bathroom down the hall. Chloe, get one of the blankets from the couch. When Mara returned, her wet hair pulled back and her clothes still damp but less dripping, she looked like she'd been carrying the weight of the world for years. She sat gingerly on the edge of the couch, blanket wrapped around her shoulders, eyes darting between Thomas and Chloe as though she wasn't sure she deserved to be there. Chloe sat cross-legged across from her, handing her a mug of cocoa. "It's my favorite," she announced. "It always makes me warm." Mara smiled faintly. "Thank you. You're very kind." For a while, they sat in comfortable silence, the storm outside muffling the world beyond the small living room. Thomas watched Mara out of the corner of his eye. Her hands shook as she held the mug, not just from the cold. "You out here alone?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, then nodded. "Been on my own for a while." "What about family?" Her gaze dropped to her lap. "They're not in the picture." Thomas didn't press. He could see the guarded wall she kept up, the kind that doesn't fall overnight. After Chloe went to bed, Thomas walked Mara to the small guest room. It wasn't much, just a single bed with faded blue sheets, but she looked at it like it was a five-star hotel. "Thank you," she said softly. "You didn't have to do this." "Chloe would have killed me if I didn't," Thomas said with a faint smile. "Get some rest." When he closed the door, he couldn't shake the thought that something about her situation didn't add up. The way she avoided questions, the way she carried herself like she was ready to run at any moment, it was more than just homelessness. Something had happened to her. The next morning, Thomas woke early. He made pancakes, Chloe's favorite, and set an extra plate for Mara. When she emerged from the guest room, her hair was still damp from a shower, and she wore the same clothes, freshly washed from the dryer. "Smells good," she said quietly. "Sit," Thomas said, gesturing to the table. "You need a hot breakfast." At first, she ate slowly, as though unsure she was allowed to take more than a few bites. But by the second pancake, the hunger took over, and she finished everything on her plate. Chloe grinned. "You eat like me when I haven't had snacks all day." Mara chuckled, the sound soft but genuine. It was the first real sign of light Thomas had seen in her. As the day went on, Thomas learned little pieces about her, how she'd been drifting between towns, picking up small jobs when she could, sleeping in bus stations or under overpasses when she couldn't. She never explained why she'd left home or how she'd ended up here. By evening, Thomas figured she'd be ready to move on. But when he mentioned driving her to the shelter, Chloe's face fell. "Can't she stay one more night?" "Please, Daddy." Thomas hesitated. It was one thing to let a stranger stay for a night. Another to extend it. But something inside told him that if Mara left tonight, she might not have another safe place for a long time. And so, without saying it aloud, Thomas began to realize Mara's stay might last longer than either of them had planned. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Mara's past was about to catch up with her. And when it did, it would force Thomas to choose between protecting his daughter and helping the young woman she had so quickly grown attached to. 2 days passed, and Thomas noticed small changes in Mara. She still moved carefully, like she was afraid of taking up too much space, but she had begun to smile more when Chloe talked to her. She helped with dishes without being asked and even mended a loose button on one of Thomas's work shirts. Still, there was a guardedness in her eyes. On the third night, Thomas came home from his shift at the hardware store to find Chloe and Mara on the living room floor, surrounded by crayons and paper. They were laughing over a drawing Chloe had made of the three of them standing under a bright yellow sun. When Chloe ran off to wash up for dinner, Thomas noticed Mara's eyes linger on the picture a moment too long. She quickly looked away, but not before he caught the glisten in them. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She nodded, though her smile was thin. "Just, haven't had a night like this in a long time." Thomas wanted to ask more, but Chloe came back, and the moment passed. Later, after Chloe was asleep, Thomas found Mara in the kitchen rinsing a cup. "I need to ask," he said, leaning against the doorway. Is there someone looking for you? Anyone I should know about? Mara froze. Her hand stilled on the cup. I'm not in trouble with the law, if that's what you mean, she said softly. But, yes. There is someone. She set the cup down and took a breath, as if deciding whether to trust him. My stepfather. He's not a good man. I left after things got bad. Been trying to keep moving so he doesn't find me. Thomas felt a slow anger rising in his chest. And your mother? She chose him, Mara said simply, and in her voice was a sadness far older than her 21 years. I couldn't stay. He nodded slowly. You're safe here. But if you think there's a chance he could find you. I don't stay in one place for long, she interrupted quickly, almost like she was protecting him from the idea. I'll leave soon. That night, Thomas lay awake listening to the rain start again. He thought about Chloe's drawing. He thought about the way Mara's hands shook when she talked about her stepfather. He thought about what it meant to open your home to someone who might bring danger with them, and about the kind of man he wanted to be in Chloe's eyes. The decision was already forming in him, even before the next morning changed everything. It happened just after breakfast. Thomas was in the garage looking for a wrench when he heard tires crunching on the driveway. He stepped out to see an old gray pickup truck pulling up, mud splattered along the sides. A tall man climbed out, broad-shouldered, wearing a worn baseball cap, his eyes scanning the house in a way that made Thomas's gut tighten. Can I help you? Thomas called, stepping forward. The man looked him up and down. Looking for a girl. Dark hair, about this tall, he said, holding a hand to chest height. Name's Mara. Thomas's jaw tightened. No one like that here. The man studied him for a long moment, as if weighing whether to believe him. If you see her, tell her her family's looking for her. His voice was cold, flat, and carried no warmth in the word family. Without another word, he got back in the truck and drove off. Thomas stood in the driveway long after the taillights disappeared. His hands were clenched, his mind racing. When he went inside, Mara was in the kitchen with Chloe, but one look at his face told her something was wrong. He was here, wasn't he? She asked quietly. Thomas didn't answer right away. Gray pickup. Baseball cap. That him? Her face drained of color. She nodded. Chloe looked between them. What's going on? Nothing you need to worry about, sweetheart, Thomas said quickly, but his voice carried a firmness Chloe wasn't used to. That night, Mara packed her backpack. I have to go, she told him at the door. If he finds me here, I don't want you or Chloe to be in danger. Thomas crossed his arms. You think I'm just going to let you walk out into the cold, knowing he's looking for you? This isn't your problem, she said, her voice breaking. I can't let you get hurt because of me. You're wrong, Thomas said. It became my problem the second you knocked on that door. And Chloe, she already sees you as part of this family. You leaving now would hurt her more than you think. Mara shook her head, tears forming. You don't understand what he's capable of. I understand enough, Thomas said, his voice steady. And I'm not going to stand by while you run for the rest of your life. You deserve better than that. She stared at him, caught between gratitude and fear. Finally, she whispered, Why? Why would you risk anything for me? Thomas glanced toward the hallway where Chloe's drawings hung on the wall. Because one day, my daughter's going to grow up. And I want her to remember that her dad stood up for what was right, even when it wasn't easy. For the first time since she'd arrived, Mara's guarded expression cracked completely, and tears spilled down her cheeks. But neither of them knew the choice Thomas had just made would soon bring the danger right to their doorstep. 2 days later, the gray pickup returned. It was a Saturday afternoon. Chloe was in her room drawing, Mara was folding laundry in the living room, and Thomas was out front clearing the driveway of scattered branches from the windstorm the night before. He heard the rumble of the engine before he saw it, and a familiar coldness settled in his chest. The truck rolled to a slow stop in front of the house, and the man stepped out, this time without the hat. His eyes were sharp, scanning the yard, then locking onto Thomas. "I told you," Thomas called, stepping forward, "no one like that here." The man smirked. "Funny. You look like a man lying to himself." Thomas's jaw flexed. "You need to leave." Instead of answering, the man started walking toward the porch. Thomas moved to block him, standing square in his path. "You don't go any farther. You have no idea what she's done," the man said, his voice low and threatening. "I don't care," Thomas shot back. "I do know what kind of man shows up uninvited, looking for a young woman with fear in her eyes. That tells me enough." From inside the house, the door creaked. Mara stood there, pale but upright, her knuckles white as she clutched the doorframe. "Go back inside," Thomas said quickly, but the man's gaze snapped to her. "There you are," he said, taking a step forward. Mara stepped onto the porch, her voice shaking. "You need to leave, Rick. That any way to talk to your family?" His tone was mocking, but there was steel underneath. "You think you can just walk away from what you owe?" "I don't owe you anything," Mara said, her voice gaining strength. "Not after what you did. I'm not going back." Rick's expression shifted from feigned calm to a flash of anger. "You're coming with me." Thomas stepped between them. "Not today. Not ever." Rick laughed, but it was humorless. "You think you can keep her from me?" "I know I can," Thomas said evenly. Rick's eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake." Thomas didn't flinch. "The mistake was thinking you could intimidate her forever. That ends here." For a tense moment, the only sound was the wind rattling the bare branches above them. Rick's gaze flicked between Thomas and Mara, calculating. Finally, with a grunt, he stepped back toward his truck. "This isn't over," he said, pointing a finger at Mara. "You'll see." The truck roared away, leaving behind a silence so heavy it seemed to press on all three of them. Mara's knees buckled, and Thomas caught her before she could collapse onto the porch. "You stood up to him," Thomas said quietly. "That took more courage than you know." She shook her head, tears streaking down her cheeks. "I was so scared." "Being scared doesn't mean you're weak," he said. "It means you're human. And you didn't let it stop you." Inside, Chloe peeked around the corner, wide-eyed. "Is he gone?" "Yeah, sweetheart," Thomas said gently. "He's gone." Mara looked at Chloe, then back at Thomas. "You shouldn't have to deal with this because of me." Thomas put a hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone anymore. And you're not going back to running." She searched his face, as if trying to believe him, then nodded slowly. For the first time since she'd knocked on his door that rainy night, Mara felt something she hadn't in years, safe. But Thomas knew safety wasn't permanent. He would have to make sure Rick didn't come back. And that meant calling in help. Thomas didn't waste time. That same evening, after Chloe was in bed, he sat down with Mara at the kitchen table. "We need to call the police," he said firmly. "If Rick's been threatening you, they need to know." Mara shook her head quickly. "I've tried before. He always twists it around. Says I'm lying or that I'm unstable. My mom backs him up." "That was when you were alone," Thomas said. "Now you have someone who saw him show up here, who can vouch for you. And you have a child in this house." His threats put Chloe at risk too. "That means the law will take it seriously." She hesitated, fear flickering in her eyes. What if it just makes him angrier? Thomas leaned forward. "Mara, he's already angry. But if we do nothing, he'll keep coming. I'm not going to let Chloe live in fear, and I'm sure not letting you go back to living that way either." Mara was quiet for a long time, then finally whispered, "Okay. The next morning, they went to the local sheriff's office. Thomas stayed beside her as she filed a restraining order, telling the officer exactly what Rick had done over the years. Thomas gave his statement about the encounter at the house, making it clear Rick had trespassed and made threats. The process was exhausting, and Mara's hands trembled as she signed the last paper. But when they stepped outside, the air felt lighter somehow, like they'd taken the first real step toward freedom. That night, Chloe asked if Mara would still be there when she woke up. "I'll be here," Mara said with a small smile, brushing Chloe's hair back. "You don't have to worry." And she meant it. Days turned into weeks, and Rick never came back. The restraining order had been served, and Thomas suspected the clear warning from the sheriff made him think twice. Mara began to settle in, helping Chloe with her school projects, cooking dinner some nights, even planting flowers in the empty garden bed by the porch. One afternoon, Thomas came home to find Chloe and Mara painting an old birdhouse together. Chloe's cheeks were streaked with yellow paint, and Mara's laugh was unrestrained and bright. Thomas stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it in, the safety, the warmth, the feeling of family that had quietly grown in the space between strangers. Later, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Mara turned to him. "I don't think I ever told you, the night I knocked on your door, I almost walked past. I didn't think anyone would want to help me." Thomas glanced at her. "And what made you knock?" She smiled faintly. "A little voice inside me said to try." "And a little voice outside," she nodded toward the window where Chloe's lamp glowed, "asked if I could stay." Thomas chuckled softly. "She's got a way of knowing things." Mara's eyes shimmered in the fading light. "You saved me, Thomas. Both of you did. I don't know how to thank you." "You already have," he said. "By letting us be part of your life." For a long moment, they sat in silence, the air warm with the peace of a second chance. Mara no longer looked like the rain-soaked, trembling young woman who had shown up at his door. She looked like someone who had found a place where she belonged. And Thomas knew, as Chloe came running out to join them, that letting her in that night had been one of the best decisions he'd ever made, not just for Mara, but for all of them.